There's a moment that happens in museums when you're walking past ancient displays, when something catches your eye and makes you stop. Not because it's beautiful or grand, but because something about it feels wrong, out of place, like a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit the picture you've been told to see. In the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, before the chaos of wars scattered so many treasures, there was a cylinder seal, small enough to fit in your palm, the kind of object that ancient Mesopotamians would roll across wet clay to leave their mark, their signature, their story. This particular seal showed something that archaeologists labelled as mythological scenes, gods and humans, creation imagery. Nothing unusual for Sumerian art, but if you looked closely at what the figures were actually doing, the scene became strange. It showed tall beings, much taller than the humans, performing what looked like a medical procedure. One figure lying down, others standing over it with instruments. And in the corner, smaller figures, clearly human, but different somehow. Waiting, watching, like they were next in line. The museum card called it a creation myth, a religious scene, symbolic representation of divine power over humanity. Safe words, academic words, words that keep everything in neat boxes where it belongs. But what if it wasn't symbolic at all? What if some ancient artist was trying to record something they'd seen or been told about? Something that actually happened, even if they didn't fully understand it themselves. Tonight, I want to explore a possibility that sits uncomfortably between ancient mythology and modern science. The idea that humanity wasn't created once, but twice. That there was a first attempt that went catastrophically wrong. A reset that wiped nearly everything clean. And then a second creation, a refined version, built from the painful lessons of the first failure. This isn't about proving anything. It's about following the evidence, even when it leads somewhere unexpected. About reading ancient texts not as primitive fantasies, but as the best attempts of intelligent people to describe things they didn't have the vocabulary to explain. So, dim your lights if you haven't already. Let the world fade to background noise. Let your body sink deeper into comfort. Because we're about to journey into the strange territory where ancient testimony meets geological catastrophe, where myths preserve memories that science is only beginning to understand, and where the story of humanity's origins becomes far more complicated than we've been taught to believe. Before we descend into these mysteries, if this kind of exploration speaks to something in you, a gentle like helps these stories find others who wonder about the same questions. And I'm curious, where are you listening from tonight? What part of the world? What time is it there? Leave a quiet comment if you'd like. Just a small mark that you are here, in this moment, wandering alongside me. Now, settle deeper. Let your breathing slow. Let your mind open to possibilities. Because the story we're exploring tonight isn't just about the distant past. It's about who we are, why we're here, and what happened to the ones who came before us. Let me take you back to a time before cities, before agriculture, before anything we'd recognize as civilization. But not quite to the beginning, because according to the texts, there was already something here. Earth was already occupied, already being worked, already part of a larger plan. Sumerian tablets, the oldest written records we have, don't begin with the creation of the world. They begin with a labor dispute, a rebellion. The moment when those doing the hard work decided they'd had enough. The texts call them the Igigi, these worker gods. For thousands of years, they've been engaged in back-breaking labor, digging the great rivers of Mesopotamia, creating irrigation channels, moving massive amounts of earth to shape the land into something productive. It was exhausting, endless work, and finally, they rebelled. Picture this scene. The Igigi gather outside the house of Enlil, the commander, the stern god who assigned them this work. They don't just complain, they burn their set tools in ritual defiance. They refuse to work another day. It's a complete strike, a worker uprising in heaven. Enlil is furious. His authority has been challenged. He wants to crush the rebellion, punish the ringleaders, make brutal examples that will prevent any future insubordination. But Enki, the god of wisdom, proposes something different, something revolutionary. Don't punish them, Enki argues. That will only breed more resentment. Instead, solve the actual problem. Create a substitute worker, a new species designed specifically to do the labor the gods no longer wish to perform. The council debates this unprecedented idea. Creating a new sentient species carries risks, but the alternative is continued rebellion or giving up the benefits of all that labor. They make their decision. Proceed with the creation project. But here's where it gets interesting. Because creating humans, according to these texts, isn't a simple act of divine will. It's not, let there be humans and humans appear. It's a complex process. It requires materials. It requires planning. It requires sacrifice. And most importantly, for our story tonight, it requires experimentation. The texts describe the procedure with unsettling detail. First, a god must die. The texts name him We'ilu, also called Geshtu-E in other versions. He's not chosen randomly. The text is specific about this. He has intelligence. He has consciousness. He possesses what they call temu, which seems to mean something like awareness or rationality. They deliberately choose a god whose essence contains the quality they want to impart to their creation. The ability to understand commands, to learn, to be trained. We'ilu is ritually killed by the assembled gods. His blood, described as containing his essence, his intelligence, is collected. His flesh is prepared. These divine materials are then mixed with clay. But not just any clay. The text specifies it must come from a particular location. The Abzu, primordial underground ocean in Sumerian cosmology. The purest clay, uncontaminated, original earth material. This mixture, divine blood and sacred clay, is then given to Ninhursag, the birth goddess. She divides it carefully into 14 equal portions, 7 for males, 7 for females. The text is precise about creating both from the start. These portions are implanted into the wombs of 14 birth goddesses, who will act as surrogates. And then they wait. There's a gestation period, time for the implanted material to develop. The birth goddesses remain in their chambers. The other gods wait, perhaps with anxiety, to see if this unprecedented experiment will succeed. Finally, Ninhursag emerges and announces success. The first humans are born, 7 males, 7 females, created to be workers, designed specifically to bear the burden the gods no longer wanted. Made, the text is explicit about this, to assume the drudgery of the gods. The gods celebrate. They hold a feast. Labor problem is solved. The Ajiji are relieved of their work. The first humans are put to their tasks. The system seems to work. The experiment appears successful. But here's where the official story starts to show cracks. Because there's another text, equally ancient, that tells a very different story about what happened during the creation process. It's called Enki and Ninmah, and it reads less like a success story and more like a classified laboratory report. The troubleshooting log that documents what went wrong before they got it right. After the successful birth of the first humans, after the celebration feast, something happens. Enki and Ninmah, both drunk on beer and divine pride, get into a contest. Ninmah boasts that as the birth goddess, she has ultimate power over human fate. She can make humans good or bad, whole or broken, exactly as she wishes. Enki challenges her. He claims that no matter what kind of flawed being she creates, he can find a purpose for it. His wisdom is greater than her creative power. So Ninmah begins creating deliberately defective prototypes, one after another, testing the limits, pushing to see what's possible. And the text lists them with clinical precision. First, a man who cannot extend his arms. His hands are paralyzed, frozen, useless. He can't hold tools, can't feed himself properly, can't work in any conventional way. But Enki examines him and immediately assigns a role. You will serve the king directly, he declares. You cannot steal because you cannot grasp. You cannot raise your hand in violence. Your disability makes you the perfect attendant for a ruler who values absolute loyalty over capability. Second, a man born completely blind. No sight, no ability to navigate independently, no capacity for visual tasks. Surely useless, right? But Enki doesn't hesitate. Your other senses will sharpen to compensate, he observes. You have the gift of music. Your hearing is more acute than the sighted. You will be a singer, a musician. Your blindness isn't a flaw, it's a different way of being. Third, a man with crippled feet who cannot walk properly. The text is damaged here, fragmentary, but Enki again finds employment, perhaps as a craftsman who works sitting down, a silversmith or jeweler, occupations requiring fine handwork, but not mobility. Fourth, a man who cannot control his bodily functions, incontinent, unable to hold back urine or other emissions, a condition that would make him a social outcast. But Enki performs what the text calls magic, though we might call it medical treatment, a ritual bath that drives out the Namtar demon, causing his condition. He's cured, made functional, integrated. Fifth, a woman who cannot bear children, barren, infertile. In a society where a woman's value is tied to producing offspring, this should make her worthless. But Enki assigns her to the queen's household. You will be a weaver, he says. Your hands will create fabric instead of your womb creating life. Or perhaps a temple priestess, consecrated to serve the gods, instead of producing children for men. Sixth, a being without male or female genitalia. The text calls this person Sag Sur Sag, which seems to describe someone born without sexual characteristics, a person of no gender, existing in a third category that shouldn't exist in a binary system. And remarkably, Enki doesn't reject this creation as an abomination. He gives this genderless being a position of honor, serving in the palace, standing before the king. The text validates this third gender, acknowledges it as legitimate, centuries before modern discussions of gender identity. 6 times Ninmah has tried to create something so broken that even Enki's wisdom cannot salvage it. 6 times she has failed. Enki has countered every defect, found purpose for every variation, demonstrated that difference doesn't mean useless. Defeated and frustrated, Ninmah throws her clay down in anger. But then Enki, vindicated and perhaps cruel in his victory, takes his turn. "Let me show you true impossibility," he says. "Watch this. Let me create something even you, great birth goddess, cannot fix." He retrieves the discarded clay and begins to mold. What he creates is described as an umul, a word that seems to mean something like prematurely born or fundamentally incomplete. The text description is fragmentary but horrifying. It's a being that cannot speak, cannot eat, cannot move properly, cannot even control its own head. Some translations suggest its neck is too weak to support its skull. This isn't a specific disability. This is a creature trapped in some grey zone between life and death, unable to interact with the world in any meaningful way, existing, but barely. Enki presents this to Ninmah with his challenge. Now you give this one a fate. You find a purpose. Make it useful. Give it a life worth living, as I did for all your creations. Ninmah tries. The text is clear that she makes genuine effort. She attempts to feed it, but it cannot swallow. She tries to communicate, but it cannot respond. She tries to give it any kind of dignified existence, any quality of life at all. But she fails completely. Finally, in despair and rage, she admits defeat. This being is neither alive nor dead. It exists in a state I cannot remedy. It is beyond my power to help. Now, mainstream scholars interpret this entire myth as ancient Mesopotamia's way of explaining and processing human disability. The myth provides both explanation and social prescription. It explains why some people are born with conditions that make life difficult, and it prescribes social response, suggesting even the disabled should be integrated into society in appropriate roles. And this interpretation might be entirely correct, but there's another way to read this text, a more literal, more disturbing way. What if this isn't explaining disability in an already established species? What if it's documenting the actual trial and error process of creating that species in the first place? What if these weren't metaphors for birth defects, but descriptions of actual prototypes, failed experiments, iterations in a development process? Consider the structure. This isn't framed as natural variation in an existing population. It's framed as discrete creation events. Specific beings made one at a time, examined, evaluated, either assigned purpose or discarded. The language is systematic. The failures are catalogued methodically. Each defect is noted with precision. This reads like quality control documentation, like troubleshooting notes from an engineering project, like the classified appendix that details what went wrong before they achieved success. And here's what makes this truly unsettling. This motif of multiple failed creation attempts appears in cultures around the world. Cultures that supposedly never had contact. Let your mind drift with that thought for a moment. Let your body sink deeper. Because we're about to cross an ocean and find the same story being told by people who shouldn't have known about it. Imagine you're standing in the Yucatan Peninsula in southern Mexico. The year is 1701. Spanish missionaries have been working for almost 2 centuries to convert the Maya people, to stamp out their pagan beliefs, to burn their books and destroy their temples. They've been largely successful. Most of the ancient Mayan codices have been burned. Most of the old knowledge has been lost. But in the small village, a group of Maya elders approach a Spanish friar. They have something they want to preserve. A text. Their creation story. They ask him to write it down in the Latin alphabet so it won't be lost when they're gone. The friar, perhaps more sympathetic than his colleagues, agrees. What he writes down becomes known as the Popol Vuh, the Mayan book of creation. When scholars finally study it carefully, they discover something shocking. It's telling almost the same story as the Mesopotamian texts, but from people who lived on the other side of the world, separated by the Atlantic Ocean, with supposedly no contact whatsoever. The Popol Vuh describes the Maya gods attempting to create humans, but it's not one perfect creation. It's multiple attempts, trial after trial, failure after failure. First attempt, the gods create beings from mud, the same basic material as Mesopotamian clay. These mud beings are formless, unable to hold shape. They cannot stand upright. Their features melt and dissolve like clay left in water. They have no strength, no coherent form. Complete failure. The gods dissolve them back into earth, unmake them, discard the prototype. Second attempt. The gods try wood. These wooden beings are an improvement. They can stand, walk, speak after a fashion. They have structure, permanence, but they have no intelligence, no souls, no inner life. They cannot worship their creators or even recognize them. They're essentially organic robots, biological machines going through motions, but lacking any true awareness or consciousness. The gods decide these wooden people are also failures, though more sophisticated than the mud beings. A great flood is sent to destroy them, but according to the myth, some survive and become monkeys in the forests. A haunting suggestion that failed human prototypes might persist as something else. Third attempt. The gods use corn, maize, the sacred crop of Mesoamerica. They grind it into dough, mix it with water, and from this create new beings. Finally, success. These corn people are perfect. Perhaps too perfect. They have godlike vision and can see everything. Godlike understanding, can know everything. They're so capable that the gods themselves become frightened. What if these perfect humans become rivals? What if they challenge divine authority? So the gods deliberately intervene a third time, not to create, but to limit. They cloud the corn people's vision, reduce their capabilities, make them more manageable. They engineer restrictions, limitations, and controls. Only after this modification, this intentional downgrade, are the gods satisfied. Success was achieved, but only after deliberately constraining the creation's potential. Now, the parallels with the Mesopotamian tradition should be obvious. Two completely separate cultures, separated by thousands of miles of ocean. Both preserve stories of multiple failed creation attempts before success. Both describe beings made from wrong materials with wrong properties who had to be destroyed or modified. Both explicitly state the same problem. Creating workers or worshippers who function as intended requires experimentation, requires failure and learning. The Popol Vuh even states it directly. We have already tried with our first works, our first creatures, but we could not get them to praise and venerate us. It's the exact same motivation driving the Mesopotamian accounts. The gods need servants, need workers or worshippers, but creating beings who fulfill that function properly requires trial and error, requires prototypes, requires failures. This convergence of similar narratives across cultures without contact is one of the great puzzles of comparative mythology. The standard academic explanation is that certain themes are universal to human experience. All cultures wonder about origins. All develop creation myths. Certain motifs recur because they reflect common psychological patterns. But the specifics trouble that neat explanation. We're not talking about vague similarities. We're talking about nearly identical narrative structures. Multiple creation attempts, wrong materials leading to failure, beings destroyed and replaced, success only after modification and learning from previous errors. That level of detail, that particular sequence appearing in both Mesopotamia and Mesoamerica, suggests something more than coincidence. Either both cultures independently developed extremely similar fictional narratives, or both are describing, through their available frameworks, something real happened. An actual event or process that got encoded into mythology across the globe, because the survivors of that event scattered and carried the memory with them. And it's not just these two cultures. When you start looking, you find the pattern everywhere. The Hindu Puranas describe multiple creations and destructions of the world. The Norse Edda speaks of previous worlds that existed before this one. Greek mythology has multiple generations of beings before humans. Chinese legends talk of previous creations that failed. The pattern repeats across every continent, in cultures that supposedly never influenced each other. But there's one element that appears in almost all these stories. One detail that's so consistent, it's almost impossible to dismiss as coincidence. After the failed attempts, after the prototypes are destroyed, there's a catastrophe, a flood, a fire, a cosmic disaster that wipes nearly everything clean. And then, after the destruction, a second creation, a new humanity, rising from the remnants of the first. Let your breathing slow, let your body grow heavier, because we're about to step out of mythology entirely and into something harder to dismiss. We're about to look at what the earth itself remembers, what's written in stone and ice, and the deep layers of geological time. I want you to imagine something. Imagine you're living 12,800 years ago. You're part of a small band of humans, maybe 30 or 40 people. Your family, your tribe. You live by hunting and gathering. You follow the herds of great animals across the landscape. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, huge bison. The world is full of megafauna, enormous beasts that seem like they'll be there forever. Life is hard, but manageable. You have fire, you have tools, you have knowledge passed down through countless generations. You know which plants to eat, which to avoid, where to find water, how to track games. You're not primitive. You're highly skilled at surviving in your environment. Your ancestors have been doing this successfully for hundreds of thousands of years. Then one night, something changes. You're sleeping in your shelter when someone shakes you awake. They're pointing at the sky, their voice filled with fear. You crawl outside and look up. The stars are wrong. There's something moving up there. Something bright. A new star, but it's getting brighter. And it's moving. Not slowly like the planets you've watched your whole life. Fast. Visibly fast, even as you watch. Over the next few days and weeks, it gets brighter and brighter until it lights up the night sky. The elders have never seen anything like it. No story, no legend describes this. It's something new, something wrong. Then one night, it happens. The sky begins to glow, not gradually like the sunrise, suddenly, brilliantly, brighter than day. And then the sound. A roar like nothing you've ever heard. The ground shakes. The air itself seems to ripple. On the horizon, you see fire. Massive explosions. The forest igniting like dry grass. The heat reaching you even miles away. More explosions. Dozens of them. Hundreds. The entire northern horizon is on fire. The pressure wave hits you, knocking you down, tearing away your shelter. Trees snap like twigs. The mammoth herd you've been following stampedes in terror. The ground keeps shaking. The sky fills with smoke and ash. Day turns to night. The sun disappears behind a black veil. And then the cold begins. Not gradually, within days, within weeks. The temperature plunges. Snow begins to fall and doesn't stop. The rivers freeze, the plants die. The great herds start dying. Within months, most of them are gone. The mammoths, the mastodons, everything you depended on for food, gone. Most of your band dies that first winter. The ones who survive eat anything they can find. Roots dug from frozen ground, bark stripped from dead trees. Other people, when there's nothing else. Survival becomes the only law, the only goal. You don't know it, but across the entire northern hemisphere, the same thing is happening. The same fire from the sky, the same sudden cold, the same die-off of animals and people. Entire cultures disappearing, entire ways of life ending. Out of millions of humans, maybe only a few thousand survive globally. You're one of them. A survivor of the day, fire fell from the sky. This isn't fiction. This isn't mythology. This is what the evidence suggests actually happened 12,800 800 years ago. The evidence comes from multiple sources, all pointing to the same conclusion. Something cosmic struck Earth. Something big enough and violent enough to change everything. In 2013, researchers working at Wonder Crater in South Africa found something strange in ancient sediment layers. A dramatic spike in platinum concentration in a layer dating to exactly 12,800 years ago. Platinum is extremely rare in Earth's crust. You don't get sudden spikes from normal processes. But platinum is common in asteroids and comets. It's a signature, a calling card left behind by something from space. That single discovery might have been dismissed as local anomaly. But then other teams started looking. The same platinum spike appeared in Greenland ice cores, in sediment across North America, throughout Europe, in multiple locations across Asia. The pattern is global. The timing is synchronous. Always in that same thin layer marking 12,800 years ago. Then they found the shocked quartz. Quartz that's been subjected to such intense pressure that its crystal structure deforms at the molecular level. This only happens in two scenarios: nuclear explosions or cosmic impacts. The shocked quartz from sites across North America matches quartz from known impact sites and nuclear test locations. Same pressure patterns, same deformation signatures. Then the melt glass. Tiny spheres of rock and metal flash heated to over 2,000 degrees Celsius. Hot enough to melt quartz, which has one of the highest melting points of any common mineral. These spheres contain a mixture of mostly terrestrial material, with traces of extraterrestrial composition. They represent the moment when cosmic material and Earth material were both vaporized, mixed in a fireball, then cooled rapidly into glass beads. Then the nanodiamonds, microscopic diamonds that only form under extreme combinations of pressure and temperature. The exact conditions during high-velocity impacts. Nanodiamonds in Greenland ice cores, in layers dating to 12,800 years ago, in dozens of terrestrial sites across 4 continents, in ocean sediment cores from Baffin Bay between Canada and Greenland. Put it together and the picture becomes clear. Comet fragments, potentially thousands of them from a massive parent comet that broke apart, screaming through Earth's atmosphere at cosmic speeds. Airbursts of unimaginable power across the northern hemisphere. Pressure waves flattening forests for hundreds of miles from each burst point. Heat igniting everything combustible. Continental scale firestorms. A study published in 2019 estimated that approximately 10% of Earth's total land biomass burned during this period. 10% of the planet on fire in a matter of days or weeks. The sky filling with smoke and ash and soot. The sun blocked out. Temperatures plummeting as an impact winter set in. But the comet didn't just bring fire and darkness. Many fragments struck the Laurentide ice sheet covering Canada, a dome of ice up to 2 miles thick in places. Comet fragments traveling at tens of kilometers per second, punching through miles of ice. The kinetic energy converting instantly to heat. Massive amounts of ice flash melting. Entire seas of water being created in moments. This sudden release of meltwater is what disrupted the Atlantic Ocean circulation system and caused the climate to crash into what geologists call the Younger Dryas. 1,200 years of bitter cold, failed harvests, advancing ice, ecological collapse. And the extinction record tells the rest of the story. In North America, over 70% of large mammal species went extinct at the Younger Dryas boundary. Not gradually, abruptly. Paleontologists can see it in the fossil record with disturbing precision. Below the boundary layer, abundant megafauna bones. At the boundary, the black layer with heavily burned remains. Above the boundary, almost nothing. The great beasts just stop appearing. Woolly mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloth, dire wolves, short-faced bears, the largest land predators ever in North America. Ancient horses and camels, yes, both native to North America before this extinction. Giant beavers the size of black bears. All gone. All at once. And humans. The Clovis culture, the dominant Paleo-Indian culture of North America, vanishes from the archaeological record at the Younger Dryas boundary. Just stops. The sites show occupation, then the boundary layer, then nothing. No occupation for generations. An entire culture erased. Population geneticists, working backward from modern DNA, calculate that human numbers globally may have dropped to as few as 3,000 to 10,000 individuals during this period. We came terrifyingly close to extinction, closer than most people realize. The survivors, scattered in isolated pockets where conditions remained barely survivable, faced a nightmare world. Everything they had known was gone, and they had no framework to understand why. No knowledge of comets, or atmospheric physics, or impact dynamics. All they knew was that the world had ended, that the gods, or sky, or fate had sent destruction, that they had survived when almost everyone else had died. The trauma must have been overwhelming, burned into their collective memory, passed down through generations as the story of the great catastrophe, the flood, the fire, the anger of the gods. Maybe that's exactly what the ancient myths are preserving. Not symbolic stories, but actual memories of actual events, filtered through the only vocabulary available to pre-scientific people. Real destruction, real floods from melting ice, real fire from the sky, real survival against impossible odds. And if that's true, if these myths are memories of something real, then the next part of the story becomes even more important. Because what happened after the catastrophe is just as strange as the catastrophe itself. Let your mind rest on that thought as your breathing slows even more, as your body grows heavier. The world ended once. The evidence is clear. And then something remarkable happened. Something that shouldn't have been possible. For scattered survivors, barely clinging to life, civilization suddenly exploded into existence, as if someone hit a reset button, as if the second creation had begun. The Younger Dryas cold period ended around 11,600 years ago. Temperatures shot back up with dramatic speed. Within decades, maybe even within years, the climate stabilized into the warm, favorable conditions we still enjoy today. The ice retreated, the plants began to recover. Life, tenacious and persistent, came back. But what happened next is what makes scientists uncomfortable. Because the survivors of this catastrophe didn't slowly, gradually rebuild over tens of thousands of years.
They didn't crawl back to hunter-gatherer subsistence and stay there for millennia, while slowly developing agriculture and society. Instead, civilization appeared suddenly, explosively, in multiple locations around the world, almost simultaneously in geological terms. And not simple farming villages. Complex, sophisticated cultures with knowledge that seems far too advanced for people who should still be struggling just to survive. Around 10,000 years ago, agriculture appears in the Fertile Crescent of Kot, Mesopotamia. Wheat and barley domesticated, sheep and goats herded, permanent settlements established. Within a few centuries, not millennia, you have villages becoming towns, towns developing specialized labor, craftsmen, traders, priests, social hierarchies. But here's the strange part. At almost the same time, agriculture appears independently in the Yellow River Valley of China. Different crops, millet and rice, different animals, but the same sudden shift from hunting and gathering to organized farming. Same social complexity emerging. And in Mesoamerica, corn, beans, squash, domesticated. The three sisters that would sustain civilizations for thousands of years. Independent development, supposedly no contact with the old world. And in the Andes Mountains of South America, potatoes, quinoa, cultivated at high altitude. Sophisticated agricultural systems in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. And in the New Guinea highlands, taro and yams. In sub-Saharan Africa, sorghum and African rice. 6, 7, 8 independent centers of agricultural development, all appearing within a few thousand years of each other, all following the same basic pattern of plant and animal domestication, leading to permanent settlement, leading to social complexity. For hundreds of thousands of years, anatomically modern humans had been hunter-gatherers. The same basic lifestyle for maybe 10,000 generations. Then suddenly, within maybe 300 generations, completely separate populations on different continents all figure out farming. All develop pottery. All develop weaving. All develop social hierarchies and trade networks and religious systems. The standard explanation is that climate stabilization after the Younger Dryas created favorable conditions. Once someone figured out farming, the knowledge spread through trade and contact. Population growth from reliable food allowed specialization. Civilization emerged naturally from these conditions. But the genetics don't entirely support slow diffusion. The archaeological record doesn't show gradual development. It's punctuated, sudden, almost like someone activated a switch. Or like survivors with knowledge from before the catastrophe suddenly had conditions where they could apply that knowledge. And then there's Göbekli Tepe, the site in southeastern Turkey that shouldn't exist, built approximately 11,600 years ago, immediately after the Younger Dryas ended, right at the dawn of this new age. Göbekli Tepe is not a simple site. It's massive, complex, sophisticated. Circular enclosures, T-shaped limestone pillars weighing up to 16 tons, covered with intricate carvings. Animals rendered in detailed relief. Foxes, lions, snakes, vultures, scorpions, spiders. Geometric patterns. Symbols whose meanings we can only guess. This shouldn't exist. Agriculture had barely begun. People were supposed to be living in simple camps, hunting and gathering, just starting to experiment with planting seeds. They shouldn't have the organizational capacity to quarry massive stones, transport them to a hilltop,
carve them with sophisticated tools, and erect them in astronomically aligned arrangements. But they did. Somehow, they did. For about 1,000 years, Göbekli Tepe served as a gathering place. People came from across the region. They feasted. They performed rituals. They carved more pillars. They maintained this site that must have taken thousands of person-hours to build and maintain. And then, around 8,000 BCE, they deliberately buried it. Not abandoned, not destroyed. Carefully, systematically filled in with tons of earth and debris, preserving it perfectly for 11,000 years. Why? Why bury your most important ceremonial site? The standard explanation is ritual closure, but the alternative interpretation is preservation. Maybe they buried it to protect it, to hide it, to preserve it for a future time when people would be ready to understand what it represents. Klaus Schmidt, the
archaeologist who excavated Göbekli Tepe, proposed that the site itself drove the development of agriculture, that the need to feed people gathering for ceremonies led to intensive plant cultivation, which led to domestication, which led to farming. Religion came first, he argued. Civilization emerged to support the religious site, not the other way around. But there's another interpretation that Schmidt rejected, but that alternative researchers find compelling. What if Göbekli Tepe was built by survivors who had knowledge from before the catastrophe? What if it represents not the beginning of civilization, but a remnant, a reconstruction, a recovery of lost knowledge? The animal carvings at Göbekli Tepe include species that went extinct during the Younger Dryas, megafauna that shouldn't appear in art from after the catastrophe, unless the artist remembered them from before, or unless someone was teaching from memory, passing down knowledge of a vanished world. And Göbekli Tepe isn't alone. Other sites are being discovered across the region: Karahan Tepe, Navali Chori, Jerf El Amar, all from the same period, all showing similar architecture and symbolism, all suggesting that immediately after the catastrophe, there was an explosion of monumental architecture that seems to come from nowhere. Unless it didn't come from nowhere, unless it came from survivors, unless, as the ancient texts claim, there were teachers after the flood, beings who emerged and taught humanity the arts of civilization. Every ancient culture has this motif, teachers appearing after a catastrophe. In Mesopotamia, they called them the Apkallu, 7 sages, described as fishmen who emerged from the sea and taught the Sumerians writing, mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, architecture, all the foundations of civilization. In Babylon, they told the story of Oannes, a fishman who came from the water and spent his days teaching humans, then returned to the sea at night. He taught them letters and sciences and arts and how to build cities and temples. In Egypt, the god Thoth, who gave humanity writing and mathematics and medicine. In Mesoamerica, Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who taught agriculture and astronomy and calendar making. In Hindu tradition, Matsya, the fish avatar of Vishnu, who saved the first man, Manu, from the flood, and then taught him how to rebuild civilization.
In Greek mythology, Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans, along with all the arts and sciences. The same story over and over in culture after culture. Teachers appearing after destruction, bringing knowledge that allows civilization to begin or begin again. Are these metaphors, symbolic representations of human innovation, personified as divine gift? Or are they memories of something real, actual teachers, whether survivors of the pre-catastrophe world carrying preserved knowledge, or the Anunnaki returning after the reset to guide the development of version 2.0? Let your mind explore that possibility as your consciousness drifts deeper. Not as certainty, but as intriguing speculation. What if the sudden emergence of civilization wasn't just climate and human ingenuity? What if the survivors carried knowledge from before? What if they were taught by those who remembered? What if we are the second creation, built on the lessons learned from the first attempt that failed so catastrophically it left scars in the earth itself? There's one question we haven't addressed yet, the question that might be keeping you awake even as your body yearns for sleep. If all this is true, if humans really were created twice, if the first version was destroyed and replaced by a second, refined version, then who did it? Who were the Anunnaki? Where did they come from? And most importantly, are they still watching? The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki as beings who came from the heavens, those who from heaven to earth came. They're not described as spiritual, immaterial gods like we think of deities today. They're described as physical beings with bodies, with needs, with personalities and conflicts and politics. They eat, they drink, they get drunk, they fall in love and lust, they fight amongst themselves, they form factions, they make mistakes. They need workers to do labor they don't want to do themselves. In other words, they sound less like gods and more like people. Advanced people. People with capabilities far beyond what ancient humans possessed, certainly. But people nonetheless. Flesh and blood, not pure spirit. Later translations and interpretations turned them into transcendent deities, made them more spiritual, more unknowable, more divine in the way we think of gods today. But in the oldest texts, they're surprisingly mundane. Powerful, yes. Advanced, absolutely. But fundamentally comprehensible, understandable. Real in a way that pure mythological gods are not. And they're described as living somewhere else, coming from somewhere else. The texts mention Nibiru, a celestial body that's been variously interpreted as a planet, a comet, a crossing point, or a way station. The exact astronomical interpretation is debated, but the key point is consistent. The Anunnaki are not native to Earth. They come from elsewhere. They arrive, they stay for a time, they do their work, and at some point, they leave or reduce their presence. The question is, did they ever actually come back? Are they still observing? Still checking on their creation? The Sumerian king list, that fascinating document recording the rulers of early Mesopotamian cities, divides history into two distinct eras: before the flood and after the flood. Before the flood, kings reign for impossibly long periods,
tens of thousands of years in some cases. After the flood, rain lengths drop dramatically, first to thousands of years, then to hundreds, then eventually to numbers that match historical records. The text marks this transition explicitly. After the flood swept over, when kingship was lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. Lowered from heaven, as if something was reinstalled. We booted, we set with new parameters. What if the Anunnaki did return after the catastrophe? What if they checked on their creation, found it nearly destroyed, and decided to intervene again? To guide the survivors, teach them, help them rebuild, but this time with better safeguards in place. That would explain the sudden appearance of advanced knowledge in multiple locations. The teachers emerging from the sea. The rapid development of civilization from people who should still be in survival mode. It would explain why the Sumerian king list shows kingship being lowered from heaven again after the flood. It would explain a lot. But it requires accepting that the Anunnaki were real, that these weren't gods in the religious sense, but actual beings. Advanced beings, certainly. Perhaps from another planet, another dimension, another time, but real nonetheless. And if they came back once, after the first reset, might they come back again? Are they monitoring us still? Waiting to see if version 2.0 will be successful, where version 1.0 failed? There are those who claim they never really left, that the ancient gods are still here, watching from the shadows, that the same bloodlines they established in ancient times still rule today, hidden in positions of power, that secret societies preserve their knowledge and do their will. These theories venture into territory that's hard to verify or falsify. Conspiracy thinking that can explain everything and therefore proves nothing. But the kernel of the idea, that our development has been guided, that we're not entirely self-made, that some influence has shaped our trajectory, is harder to dismiss when you look at the patterns, the sudden jumps in capability, the punctuated equilibrium of human development, periods of stasis interrupted by sudden, rapid advancement, the global patterns of mythology that seem too consistent to be coincidence, the archaeological mysteries like Göbekli Tepe and other ancient megalithic sites that seem beyond the capabilities of their supposed builders. And in modern times, the phenomenon that governments and militaries now openly acknowledge, unidentified aerial phenomena, objects in our skies performing maneuvers that violate our understanding of physics, right-angle turns at hypersonic speeds, transmedium travel from air to water with no loss of velocity, acceleration that should create G-forces that would liquefy any biological pilot. The US government, through official channels, through the Pentagon, through congressional testimony, has now admitted these objects exist. They've released videos. They've confirmed that military personnel have observed these phenomena for decades. They don't know what they are. They don't know where they come from. But they're real. Are these the Anunnaki, the gods checking on their creation, monitoring our progress, ensuring version 2.0 doesn't go off the rails the way version 1.0 apparently did? Or are we now the experiment that's exceeded its design parameters? Are we the creation that's become too advanced, too capable, too independent? We split the atom, unleashing energies once reserved for stars. We mapped our own genome, reading the very code of life. We're building artificial intelligence, creating our own created beings. We're about to become creators ourselves. Does that make us successful in the eyes of our creators? Does it make us their equals? Or does it make us a problem that needs to be managed? Another failed experiment that's growing beyond control. Maybe we're approaching another reset point, another moment when the cycle completes and everything begins again. Maybe that's what all the apocalyptic thinking in our culture is really sensing. Not the end of the world from climate change, or nuclear war, or asteroid impact, but something else. Something older. The return of the gods, the completion of the cycle, the judgment on whether version 2.0 has succeeded or failed. Or maybe, more hopefully, we're finally becoming what they intended all along. Not servants anymore, not tools, not workers bound to fulfill someone else's purpose, but truly independent beings, conscious, creative, capable of choice. Maybe the whole point was to create beings who could eventually transcend their programming, break free from limitations, become something new. Maybe we're not a failed experiment. Maybe we're a successful one that's finally reaching maturity. The night is very deep now. Your body is so heavy you can barely feel it. Your mind is drifting between waking and sleeping, between questions and answers, between ancient past and uncertain future. The truth is, we don't know. We can't know with certainty. The evidence points in multiple directions. The ancient texts can be read multiple ways. The genetic and geological data supports catastrophe and bottleneck, but doesn't prove intervention. The sudden emergence of civilization suggests guidance, but doesn't require it. The UFO phenomena might be alien observers, or might have mundane explanations we haven't discovered yet. All we know for sure is that we're here, that our ancestors survived something terrible, that civilization appeared with surprising speed after that survival, that we carry in our genes and our myths and our collective memory the sense that we're part of something larger, something older, something not entirely of our own making. Maybe we were created twice. Maybe the Anunnaki were real. Maybe they're still watching. Or maybe we're exactly what evolution and natural selection and blind chance created over millions of years. And the myths are just stories, just ways our ancestors made sense of trauma and mystery. Either way, the journey has been extraordinary. From scattered survivors of a cosmic catastrophe to a species that's walked on the moon and peered to the edge of the observable universe. From desperate refugees of the Younger Dryas to builders of civilization that spans the globe. From version 2.0, if that's what we are, to something entirely our own. We are the children of catastrophe, the descendants of survivors, the twice created, if the myths speak truth, or the once evolved, if science has the final word. But however we came to be, we're here now, conscious, questioning, wondering about our origins and our purpose and what comes next. And maybe that wondering, that questioning, that refusal to accept simple answers is what makes us truly human. Not our DNA, or our biology, or even our consciousness, but our insatiable need to understand where we came from and why we're here. Sleep now. Dream of ancient laboratories and cosmic catastrophes, of teachers emerging from the sea and civilizations rising from ashes. Dream of the first humans who failed and the second who survived. Dream of the Anunnaki watching from the stars, or sleeping in the earth, or never having existed at all, except in our need for answers. The questions will still be here when you wake, written in clay tablets and genetic code, in geological layers and architectural mysteries, in myths that span the globe and memories we can't quite place. We are the evidence of something remarkable, whether created twice or evolved once. We are here. We remember. We question. We wonder. And that, perhaps, is answer enough. Good night.